It's taken me 31 years to discover that there are certain topics that people who come to church would rather not hear about. Call them those awkward topics. We hear about one of them today. And it's Jesus who brings up this topic. He says in this parable, at the end of this parable, he sums it up, he interprets it, and he says clearly, a slave cannot serve two masters. He will either love the one and hate the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. That uncomfortable subject is wealth. Wealth in its many forms. Money, possessions, the totality of those material things that are of value. Now, why does Jesus bring up this uncomfortable subject? Why does Jesus often talk about wealth in the Gospels? And particularly in Luke's Gospel, where again and again and again the subject is wealth. And just to preview next week, the Gospel is about the rich man Dives, and Lazarus. So next week we'll also be sitting here awkward and uncomfortable. Now, what is it about wealth that makes people so uncomfortable? That makes me uncomfortable? Well, wealth is often associated with just a lot of negativity. It really brings up these deep things that are uncomfortable things. It brings up guilt. It brings up anger. It brings up shame. And it brings up anxiety. I have a lot of anxieties around money. A lot of struggle with money. Because at the heart of it, I have to realize, or I do realize, that at the heart of it, I'm just not a person who trusts God very successfully. I trust wealth, but I don't trust God. Not altogether, and not always. And so God's got a lot of work to do with me. But Jesus brings up wealth because of its power over us. Its power to undo us. Its power really to ruin us spiritually. The word that is translated wealth in the Gospels, the word is a word that is also translated a little more kind of exactly as mammon. And that word comes from an Aramaic word, which at its root means to trust. So mammon is that which we trust in. And so that's what Jesus is concerned about. Are we trusting in God, or are we trusting in our wealth, our money, our possessions, all of those material things that have value in the world's eyes? So Jesus, he brings up this uncomfortable subject because he knows that it is fundamental that we think about it, that we ponder it, that we pray about it, that we wrestle with it with his help and come to what he hopes will be the right resolution at the end of that struggle. He brings it up because it's important that we reflect on what it is or who it is that or who possesses us. I ran across a little reading from C.S. Lewis. One of his best-known books, but maybe, and most influential, even after the Chronicles of Narnia, is a little book called The Screwtape Letters. And The Screwtape Letters, it's a novel. Forgive me if I go English teacher here on you for a minute, but it's a novel. And it's made up of these letters. That's the kind of form, this epistolary form of the novel. And it's a collection of letters between a senior tempter whose name is Screwtape and a junior tempter whose name is Wormwood. And the senior tempter is advising the junior tempter on ways to get into the souls of human beings and ways to capture those souls for their master, who is the devil, the enemy. And so this is what the senior tempter, Screwtape, says to Wormwood. And he says one of the best ways is through possessions. We can get to them. It's like a highway to the soul. We can get right in there and walk down that highway and grab a hold of their souls, and they'll be ours forever. They'll be our masters forever. Listen to what he says. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership, which sound equally funny in heaven as in hell. And we must keep them doing so. And then Screwtape uses an analogy. He writes, "It is as if a royal child whom his father has placed for love's sake in titular command of some great province under the real rule of wise counselors should come to fancy that he really owns the cities, the forests, and the corn, in the same way as he owns the bricks of his nursery floor. We produce this sense of ownership not only by pride, but by confusion. We teach them not to know the difference among the different kinds of personal pronouns. The me, the my, the mine. And then he concludes, Screwtape does, the word mine is fully possessive, in the fully possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our father, now, when he says our father, he means the devil. In the long run, our father, the devil, or the enemy, that is God, will say mine of each thing that exists, and especially of each person. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy, God, at present the enemy says mine of everything on the ground that he made it. The devil, our master, hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. Screwtape is telling Wormwood get them to believe that everything they have is theirs. And then let's use that, those possessions, that wealth, in order to possess them, in order to gain them for the spiritual enemy, the devil. So it's because of that power of possession, that Jesus brings up this uncomfortable subject. And in doing so, invites us, encourages us to reflect on our relationship with our wealth. Is it mammon for us? Is it mammon in the sense that we trust our wealth and we ascribe to our wealth ultimacy? It is of ultimate value. And in that sense of ultimacy, it is our God, small g. And in that sense, if it be our God, small g, then it really is a matter of our being possessed by our wealth. And as possessed by our wealth, so possessed by our spiritual enemy, whose one aim is to separate us from God, to keep us separated from God, because that is death. And that is the tempter's aim. At this time of the year, we're hearing more and more talk about wealth in the church. And perhaps feeling more and more uneasy, because that talk is bringing up those unpleasant feelings, maybe. Bringing up in us maybe that guilt, maybe that shame, maybe that anger, maybe that fear. That fear of letting go, and that fear of living in trust in God, and trusting that God will be there for us, that we can count on God, that God will provide for us. So let me invite you in the weeks ahead, as we are in the midst of this giving campaign, to consider your relationship, as I am considering my relationship, with wealth, and to ask, what is it that possesses me? Do I possess it in the sense that I am that good steward who takes good care of the master's property, including the master's wealth, including God's wealth, so that I serve him with my wealth? Or am I serving that wealth? Am I looking out for my own interests and serving only myself? Am I that dishonest steward in the parable? And as we are pondering what it is of God's that God has entrusted to us, which is everything, starting with our very lives, as we are pondering what we have from God, what we possess, because God has entrusted it to us, might I suggest that we remember these words of Jesus? A slave cannot serve two masters. He will either love the one and hate the other. He will either despise the one and be devoted to the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. I've got to make a choice. We've got to make a choice. Whose we are and whom we serve. We can't serve God and wealth, but we can use our wealth that God has entrusted to us to serve God. Amen.